Welcome to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, an audio presentation of the Scottish Rite Journal, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, by the Supreme Council of the World. This week's article is The Geometry of Character, Considerations on the Moral Elements of Operative Masonry by Morgan Smith, and comes from the January-February 2023 issue of the Scottish Rite Journal. When the Roman architect Vitruvius penned the first written work on architecture in 27 BC titled De Architectura, he named the branches of study he deemed necessary for a complete education of an architect, from music and medicine to astronomy and history. It is his discourse on the virtues of philosophical study, however, that is most prophetic of the moral underpinnings of later speculative masonry. For Vitruvius, the architect's study of philosophy renders him courteous, just, and honest without avariciousness. This is very important, for no work can be rightly done without honesty and incorruptibility. It remains one among several pieces of evidence that the moral training of the builder has been with us from antiquity, that moral conduct was, even in the earliest days, a distinct piece of what Dr. Albert Mackey referred to as the skeleton upon which was strung the living muscles and tendons and nerves of the speculative system. Masonic tradition holds that speculative masonry developed from a purely operative system, but the groundwork for a system of moral instruction seems to have existed from masonry's earliest operative forms, the result, perhaps, of an almost universal perception across the ancient and medieval world of the inherent link between craft and the creative spirit, humanity and divinity, geometry and creation. That moral instruction is tied to the imagery of craft that is, perhaps, an inevitability when one considers how the craft has been perceived at its deepest level across cultures of builders. Most religions built temples, and high architecture in antiquity was inextricably bound to the elevation of the human spirit. The ancient Greeks, wielding the tools of craft and philosophical imagery, used the square to refer to man of supreme honor and virtue. The square or cubical man, of whom Aristotle wrote, would subject himself to the perfectly square test of justice and integrity. In this way, geometry, as the substructure of all forms of craft, acts as the foundation on which civilization and moral understanding is grown. Plato wrote in his Republic that geometry lends itself to knowledge of the eternal, and will draw the soul towards truth, and create the spirit of philosophy. It is therefore a certain deeper insight into the working of the cosmos, including the harnessing of these laws in the efforts of making and building, through which man reaches even nearer to God and thus the highest moral potential of his own heart. The ancients doubtless recognized the special status held by arts and craft as unique among all human endeavors in that they most authentically manifest the God-given creative instinct in man, and further, the moral capacity of the only creature made in his image. Christian writer and philosopher Dorothy Sayers, writing in the 1940s on the subject of man's creative will, put it well when she remarked, "If the common man is to enjoy the divinity of his humanity, he can come to it only in virtue and right of his making." The idea persisted into the Middle Ages, revealing itself in the moral instruction set within the framework of operative lodges. Similar to the instruction found in De Architectura, the 16th century Shaw Statutes, penned by William Shaw to Scottish stonemasons' lodges, implore brothers to do their jobs with virtuous character, charity, and brotherly goodwill, giving a moral structure to operative duties. A number of Masonic historians, further, have placed the ancestral moral element of modern Freemasonry firmly within the earliest operative lodges. Writer of Masonic history Thomas Carr believed that the old constitutions were mainly moral in nature. In these ancient charges, we get evidences of the commencement of moral teaching and of secret signs. It is at once obvious that from very early times a high moral standard was inculcated by these ancient charges. Some, such as Worshipful Master Don Falconer, have argued that the ecclesiastical proximity of Masons' guilds lent itself to the development of moral precepts reflected in these original charges. Quite tellingly, the chief architect of the Abbey of Saint-Nicolas-de-Lens in France, Hugues Libergy, was interred with a stone slab that bore his own image surrounded by his tools, a measuring rod, compass, and square, and vested in what one scholar believes to be none other than the robes of an academic theologian. It can be said that true mastery of a thing requires self-mastery, that the built reflects the spirit of the builder as much as creation reflects the mind of the creator. It is not a coincidence that the symbolic foundation of Freemasonry should be those tools used in the act of craft and building, those very acts that make us human and connect us as creators directly to our higher creator. Tipping his hat to the work of John Ruskin, Joseph Fort Newton once wrote that beauty in architecture depends for its dignity upon arrangement received from the human mind, expresses, while it reveals, the quality of the mind, whether it be noble or ignoble. In this way, he echoes St. Bonaventure, who wrote as far back as the 13th century that the mechanical arts are a means by which the artisan inculcates his or her spirit into a created work, and that a creation cannot be separated in this way from its creator. Whether or not ancient and medieval builders wholly recognize the deeper significance of their need for a civilized code and moral standard ultimately may still be debated, but the Masonic tradition sheds much light. The order in creation parallels the order that must be cultivated in one's own heart through moral refinement and edification. As an orderly mind and conduct was deemed necessary for the proper construction of temples to the divine, so now does geometry of character bring the same structure, stability, illumination, and beauty to a man's life. Like and share this article, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you wish to comment, please leave one, and as a reminder, hit the notifications bell. Any accompanying photographs or citations for this article can be found in the corresponding print edition. The Scottish Rite Journal is published by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, by the Supreme Council of the World. Mark Dreisenstock, 32nd degree, KCCH, Managing Editor. I'm your host, Matt Bowers.